Thank you for joining us today. This session is HADR on SQL Server Azure Virtual Machines. It's everything you need to know. Everything is in the notes and in the deck. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. This is rich. Okay, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of notes, a lot of links, best practices, and so forth. So I want to make sure you have the deck after this. It's going to be really important. So I want this to be interactive and light. Okay, so I really kind of want to get some feedback for y'all. So I'm going to start off. How many of y'all are already running SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine? Cool. Who is already running a HADR option in the cloud on Virtual Machine? What? Just yell out, what are y'all doing? Backups. That's fun. Hey, that's building block to all, like building block to a fine breakfast. Starts with a good backup, right? So backups, what else? Who's doing anything else? Oh, okay. So we're starting. Hey, backups are important. Actually, backups are a big topic here. So we're going to talk about that. All right, my name is David Plus. I'm a Principal Program Manager. I've been at Microsoft for a little over 15 years. SQL Server Storage Engine, a lot of work in the Dallas space for SQL Server 2022. SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, and of course, high availability and disaster recovery. Okay. So we're going to talk about the many HADR options that we have. The key thing is, how do you choose? What's different? Do I do the same thing on-prem? Should I do in the cloud? Should I say like copy, paste? Copy my Azure solution that I have exactly that I have on-prem and do it in the cloud? Probably not. Should I start with all my SQL Server high availability features and do those in the cloud exactly as I would do them on-prem? Probably not. Question is why and what are the nuances? And we're going to try to get into that. And this demo I'm definitely doing, and this is where I'm going to need, Matt's going to let me know, like, hey, you got time. Definitely do this demo because we're going to show you how we make one of the key things way easier thanks to Taryn Pratt, what Taryn on my team did for this, and this is a great demo, so I really want to show you all that. So there's many options to choose from. You know, some options are easier to configure than others. Some options are more of a disaster recovery option than others. I mean, we just named one. Backup restore, building block to a disaster recovery strategy, right? And some options are going to give you a little bit both DR and high availability. It all depends on the dial that you have. Question is also, well, how do we adjust that dial? Again, it goes to what are we trying to solve for? What are we trying to protect? Okay. And of course, finally, like I said, we have a way of deploying an Azure an availability group way easier. It's an end-to-end portal experience. You get your cluster, you're going to get your listener, your VMs, your networking, and everything in just one shot, and it's all done through the portal. All right. I warned y'all. So, what is HADR? What does it mean to have high availability and disaster recovery? We tend to throw these terms around. It's like we group these together like they're the one and the same. They are not. They're drastically different. I'm going to give you a little angle how I look at it. Maybe a way that you can also help kind of articulate this, because here's the thing. How many of y'all are fighting, you want high availability and disaster recovery? Ooh, I hope I don't get too spicy early. You want high availability and disaster recovery, but you're fighting with your organization to move the needle forward to do that. I've been there, I know what it's like. So hopefully I can help make that argument as well, to plan for the future, your future protection, rather than a false concept of what an availability scenario you may have had in the past. You just got lucky, you didn't fail. You didn't have the protections in place, so there was no guarantee. So again, we tend to throw these terms together. Oh, I love this scene. But I kind of twisted it around. We had a HADR event with SQL Server on our Azure Virtual Machine. Oh no, what is it? Well, HADR stands for High Availability Disaster Recovery, but that's not important right now. We've got data. We have data to recover. So if you don't understand that scene, here's your homework after this. Go watch the airplane, the movie. So the thing is if we don't have the protections in place, you know, anytime we're in a recovery position, anytime we're in an availability challenge, there's serious risk of downtime and data loss, and that's what we're trying to prevent. So there's a lot of reason this could happen. I live in Titusville, Florida. Someone put a magnet there that said all hurricanes come to us, right? It's like a giant nature's giant Zamboni it sends towards Florida every so often. Now those are those unplanned scenarios, right? Data center failure, server failure, IO subsystem failure, all this kind of stuff could happen. A lot of it's, hello, I see Aditya walking in, another colleague of mine. A lot of this stuff can happen. You also have planned downtime. Can planned downtime lead to unplanned downtime? Anyone ever reboot or see someone reboot a server? And it's not supposed to do that. A lot of times, a lot of the failures, how many of y'all seen failures when you're coming up? Everything goes down and when it's, right? So some of these planned events, that maintenance turned into a bad moment. And that's where the protection levels that we have in place kick in. All right, so let's get into some definition to terms, some key thing. What is disaster recovery? Anybody want to throw out what their definition of disaster recovery is? Insert bad language here. There could be like I did this session before. It's like smoking hole in the earth. I'm like, okay, all right. Like this is your ability to recover data, to bring the data back, and the whole point here is to lose as little as possible, hopefully none. Okay? Your high availability is all about data accessibility. Is the data available? Can I get to it? Can I query it? So I'm going to give you an angle on this, the way I kind of look at this. It's a bit of obfuscation, right? It's a bit of masking what errors kind of happen so the user is not impacted. So if I have a high availability solution that I've deployed well, and let's say I lose a VM, let's say I lose a disk, let's say I have a network blip, let's say I have any kind of failure at all, if the user does not notice, that is a successful solution. It is what I want. Now, do I want failure? Of course I don't. I don't want any issues. I don't have to replace anything. I don't want anything to go down. But if my planning and resilience leads to the user never seeing any of the dirty laundry or issues that I have behind the scenes, then I think I've done my job. Keep that data accessible. That's the angle of high availability. Now, you look at that, it's like, how could we possibly have these two terms together and say they're one and the same after that description? Fair? Right? You plan for both. You plan for them separately. And how you do it in the cloud may be different than the way you do it on-prem. And those nuances I hope to get to touch on. Now, we have some more definitions of terms that we dig into here a little more. I'm not moving around too much, am I? I'm sorry. I'm not saying, okay, I'm good. Recovery point objective. This is data loss for the environment measured in minutes. Recovery time objective. This is the downtime that you deal with, how long it's going to take for you to get back on your feet. Also measured in seconds and minutes. Usually the business stakeholders are going to define this, what it means to be back on your feet, usually. And this is sometimes where, as a DBA or server network professional, that you kind of have to lean into your business and try to force these terms to get defined. Not just take the definition, but how does it apply? What does it mean to be down? What does it mean to lose data in this application, in this kind of framework? Once those get defined, these need to be in a SLA of some sort. I very strongly believe that you need a service level agreement to try to level set and say, this is the gauges that we need to have in place. This is what it means for us to be down, and this is what it's going to keep us accountable at whatever level to make sure that we don't have impact to the business. Could a report off of an asynchronous replica, could that have an SLA tied to it? Yeah? Does anyone say no? If there's financials behind that report, absolutely, I've seen it. Now, usually in that scenario, you're probably going to have a different level of SLA depending on the parts of your solution and how those are measured, but you need to have less SLA. What's in the SOP? What should my SOP do for my SLA? My standard operating procedures. Anyone? Better tell me how I'm doing that. So if I'm going to have these levels, my SOP better, that's going to, the SLA may be this big, SOP's giant, right? Usually a huge book. But those step-through processes, everybody should be able to follow those in order to, in the case of a disaster. Okay? Now, the reason I put this slide together is sometimes we throw these terms RPO and RTO and we just don't really think about it. How does it get applied? You know what? You can measure these, folks. So like for an always-on availability group situation, your send queue, we usually think of that as the amount of data you could potentially lose. And your redo queue is usually tied to your RTO. So we measure availability in terms of RTO, the maximum allowable downtime when a failure occurs, and the recovery point objective is a maximum allowed data loss when a failure occurs. This can be measured. We actually have perfmon and always-on availability groups DMVs on-prem as well as in Azure that you can use to measure this. And I would definitely keep your eye on this from a from a measuring perspective, monitoring perspective. All right. This slide is the Spinal Tap AMP. Should you go to 11? So who's doing like a really large deployment on-prem, let's say a failover cluster deployment, always-on availability group deployment? Does anyone have a large deployment on-prem? Just curious. Give me, what do you have? Just throw it out. Okay. Oh, so you have like 2 asynchronous and two synchronous, okay, and those are stretched out in multiple data centers? Okay, and in that protection, what were you're protecting for? Was there like a server issue that y'all are protecting for, storage issue y'all are protecting for, or maybe a combination of both? So someone threw it out and y'all met. Hey, that's awesome. So they forced the SLA. So basically someone made a promise and then they had to meet it with their availability solution. That's good. What I'm going to tell you is if you have now that's not giant, like I'm like you've just really kind of scaled out solution to have all these levels of protection. No, I'm not going to tell you to take that, copy paste and put it in the cloud. What you're protecting for on-prem is likely not necessary to protect at the same level in the cloud. And there's nuances to how you protect. I mean, you're talking 60 plus data centers in the cloud, multiple copies of your data natively. They use a RAID 0 in the cloud. We can probably use different RAID level protections on-prem. All that should be considered. And you may want to adjust the level of resiliency you need in the cloud versus what you're already doing on-prem, right? I mean, you would do that organization to organization. Like if you switch companies, even if it's all on-prem, you're not going to necessarily do it exactly at one company. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Not going to do this exactly at one company as you would do at another, right? Those considerations should be taken in play. Anybody want to add anything before I move? Okay. All right. So discussing high availability disaster recovery. So you should not go out and just build massive AGs that scale across 5 regions and do all that stuff, right? So once you get your list of requirements, okay, of what it is and what you want to actually protect and your RPO and RTO, then that's when you start figuring out the solution that you actually need. So we're not going to advise necessarily on the perfect solution. Again, one size doesn't fit all, but we can direct you to the documentation and the best practices and advise on experience, especially where we have similar availability needs. But unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. There's no really easy answer to this, okay? All right, so let's talk about our options in SQL Server. So is there anyone here who's not familiar with the different header options in SQL Server? So everyone's familiar with this list? Good. These are the same, this is the exact same list you have in the cloud. I'm going to take one off the list. Let's no more database mirroring, right? We've addressed that with always-on availability groups, right? So you don't need that. But backup and restore, we have someone doing that. We have someone already doing always-on availability groups. We have people planning for availability groups. But there's different backup and restore options. I still love log shipping. I seriously still love, here's why I love log shipping. It's simple, it's basic. It just works. Backup, copy, restore the no recovery. Keep copying those things, all driven by agent jobs, right? Right, I still love it. Failover clustering, anybody doing a lot of failover cluster work on-prem? Likely, this one is likely the scenario where I will tell you that you should probably consider adjusting and going with always-on availability groups in the cloud. The biggest topic here is the shared storage topic. And that is the biggest area that affects failover clustering, especially with the different types of storage options that we have and the limitations of those options. Additionally, how we look at the connectivity between nodes in the cloud for a failover cluster instance. If you're gonna do it, I'm gonna tell you to adjust certain settings. I have those settings noted and referenced in this deck directly to the article. If you do not do this, and I'm just warning you, if you do this in the cloud, you could run into a scenario where you get ping, like a ping scenario. Just say fails over, what Taryn would call a flappy scenario where you're just failing back and forth. So we tell you to adjust these settings, heartbeat, connectivity settings for failover cluster instances. Okay. And of course, we have always-on availability groups, and we're going to touch on this. Love always-on availability groups. Awesome feature. I was part of that testing when that came out. And distributed availability groups, really strong option for this in the cloud. If you're needing multiple copies of your data, it's like an availability group of availability groups. You might replicate this out and take advantage, one, of Azure's really strong network connectivity between the data centers, as well as the ability to have these 60+ regions with paired regions for protection. It's really important for a high availability scenario. Wait, before I don't want to, oops, my bad. I went way forward. Before I move, Aditya, anyone want to add here before I move on? I think, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing. What I think I heard is, how many databases would I recommend? Is that what I heard? Like, I would say like and Matt, Aditya, I'll chime in here too, because I'm curious which, database count, it would be like an estimate, right? Like if it's like a whole ton of databases that all fell over together, maybe FCIs, that's where FCIs help, right? Especially, always-on availability groups had this feature. I don't want to, I'm gonna try not to, okay, I'm 20 minutes. I'll try to, so always-on availability groups has this feature where one database affects the group, and you can choose to opt in on that. A lot of customers using that feature. The reason they do it is they look at the availability group and they tie it to their app. They basically say, and I get this, I fully understand this, and it's the reason the feature is there, okay? This database is offline. None of these databases do me any good, because if that database causes a problem for whatever reason, the app can't work anyway. So just fail it over so my app can get up and it makes sense. And okay? But there gets a point where if you have that availability group and there's a whole lot of databases, then it could potentially become a problem. I would say, I would look less on the database count and more monitoring the health of it. Thank you. That's actually important. All right. What? Yeah, and I'm seriously, I am having trouble hearing back there. Yes.
One point though to consider is number of worker threads. It is directly proportional to that. So your performance and the number of databases is directly proportional to number of worker threads which are doing parallel redo and everything. So
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, in 1700 databases, if you have, let's say, 1500 databases idle, sure, I will still go for always on availability groups because they
Thank
are
you,
idle.
Adisha.
But if not, yeah, as David said, Philo clusters.
And here's the thing, SQL Server 2022 has improved on that. Go to the SQL Server, what's new, parallel, hold on, I got a note on this, one sec. I don't want to, I'll tell you what, hit me up afterwards. It's a parallel redo thread, and there's another one that we updated in SQL Server 2022. It's on the what's new page. And if Aditya, if someone can pull that up while thank you, I appreciate it. That will help. What version of SQL are you on? It is definitely 2022, yeah. Excellent, thank you, Aditya. That was really, I would have forgotten that point. All right, backup restore. Backup restore, it's not for high availability, this is really for disaster recovery. And there's different flavors here. Regarding your protection level, Azure Storage maintains 3 copies of every, by the way, we document what I'm saying here. We have 3 copies of Azure VM disk to guarantee the protection for data loss and physical data corruption. So unlike on-prem, you may not need to focus on the hardware failure quite as much, but I always am going to tell you to use backup, always backup. And I mean, for really key reasons. One is like ransomware. That's a big one. And I absolutely love the Azure backup option, but there's some things to be aware of. One approach is backup to URL. So backup to Azure Blob Storage using the backup URL. This is part of the command in SQL Server. Most DBAs are probably not doing this on-prem unless they're migrating or testing, but it's definitely a part of what we do in Azure. There's some limitations. The maximum size supported using block blobs for striping is 12.8 terabytes. I definitely recommend striping your backups to avoid reaching that block limit, especially when using differentials or uncompressed backups. The other thing, too, to think about, and that, since we're on the topic of compression, is think about your VM capabilities not blowing out your I/O, and if you use compression, monitor the CPU on that VM as well. Now, there's some flavors, some things to consider. There's a link that I'm going to do this on every slide, taking you to our key documentation. Manually, of course, you can do this on any version of SQL Server, manually taking your backups. Though I would recommend having one option and not having abilities of folks going in and backing up randomly, because you need to be able to monitor for this. Automated backups via SQL IaaS extension on Azure VM, that's 2014 and up. And Azure Backup for Enterprise Software Experience is going to be SQL Server 2012 and up. I have that, if you saw that table that I put in here, I actually kind of altered this table from the documentation. There's a reason why I put this in here. Everything you see for Azure Backup, all the yeses, is where automated backup and manual backup cannot achieve those scenarios. Azure Backup is something that you're gonna purchase. And here's the deal with this. It has something called a recovery services vault. You go to the recovery services vault to do your restores. So this is a bit of a learning curve. It's far more robust than just, it can back up all kinds of stuff. Like you can back up VMs, managed disks, file shares, SQL Server databases, Azure blobs, all kinds of stuff with Azure Backup. It's not just for SQL Server databases. Okay, but you're going to do this through the Recovery Services Vault, and it's very much an Azure service that is paid for. If you have a lot of infrastructure, and this is something that you need protection across your environment, definitely take a look at Azure Backup. Okay, log shipping. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. It's just one of those options that, depending on your RPO and RTO, log shipping has its place. It's simple, it works. And honestly, it's a great DR strategy for getting into the cloud. You're like, look, I just want another DR place for my environment, and this is I'm stepping my toe into the cloud with this option. It's a great way of doing that. And so I have a tutorial here, the AKMS SQL VM-LS, that takes you to what you would need to do and some things to be aware of, along with your shared storage option. All right, How are we doing on time? 25 minutes? Okay. I'm going to need to move quicker. So benefits of failover cluster instance. Okay. So with FCI, your availability operates at the instance level versus every other feature which operates at the database level. You are protecting the compute. Okay, the result is a more convenient experience to recover from because you're addressing the machine itself, but the setup and configuration is more complex as failover cluster instance requires shared storage and has largely been tuned on-prem. This is what I mean, like the shared, if I need multiple copies of my data, what do we do on-prem? We layer solutions, right? I may do failover cluster instance plus log shipping, plus always on availability groups, right? Because there's the shared storage topic, and it's tuned on-prem. So if you need to do this in the cloud, I'm going to tell you to look at those heartbeat settings and to adjust for that. The failover cluster solution, like I think that best practice, and this kind of answers a little bit of the question in the back. Again, I'm going to tell you to monitor, but failover cluster solution is where, let's say if you had 500 plus databases and it was relatively complex on your server and you wanted to protect everything, maybe that's a good use case. That availability group scenario we were talking about, I've seen that. So that's the only weakness there. The downside is the cost of hardware duplication, no readable secondaries, and again, there's one copy of the data. Okay, now let's get into some of the nuances here. This is where I'd rather spend a little more time. So the reason why I tell you to kind of be aware of some of this stuff is this is not a topic that you contend with on-prem. All of a sudden it's like, wait, what? Like that's not, storage is not, I'm used to storage being quite a bit of a different topic on-prem. The reason why it goes back to whether or not you would actually need to reevaluate what you have. And one of those things that you have to do is obviously with an FCI, you have to have shared storage. Azure, there's a lot of options, and I don't say I recommend any given one of them because it all goes back to what we said in the beginning, it depends. So with Premium SSD, UltraDisk, Premium SSD v2, Premium SSD v2 and UltraDisk are based on the same backend, okay? Same direct drive backend. So a lot of those limitations look to be the same, okay? Watch for that. Now, I will say a lot of them are falling off aggressively because as we're knocking some, and we have Azure backup support now, things like that, okay? So watch the documentation, watch the what's new. I've got the links in here. So you can go and say, oh, okay, so I need Azure Site Recovery. I need Azure Site Recovery. It's a key thing. Well, if you deploy an option, I don't even get always on availability groups, it could be anything, and that all it takes is for storage to not support that, all of a sudden ASR is off the table. So any of these limitations at any level, be aware of that if you have a need. It may affect your choices, and that's the key thing. Whether it's storage spaces, anything, any of these. Okay. Storage Spaces Direct, it provides a software-based SAN, supports SQL Server 2016 and up, and it can only be used in the availability set. Availability zones are not supported, for example. So I've tried to, like I said, be really good at putting these links together, and there's a link here at the bottom. Okay. So I definitely want to know, what do y'all love about always on availability groups? There's so much I love about always on availability groups. The number of replicas. It's like basically I have a slider, I have a dial about how do I want to always on availability groups to protect me? What do I want to use them for? Do I want to have readable secondaries for reporting? Do I want to do what about automatic page repair? Being able to repair a page. I have a bad page and be able to get it from another healthy replica. How about those being able covering your resiliency options? Being able to say that I want to have a backup, have a preferred replica, things like that. There's a lot of strong capabilities. Any others any other capabilities that y'all really like with always on availability groups? What's that? Oh yes, absolutely. Quick failover. Actually, speaking of failover options, Like I can say, I want this availability group, you're going to do this. You're going to do this, right? And then we can take advantage of the cloud and the number, the protections that we have, yeah, with those availability options. Yeah, so, and choice between synchronous and asynchronous. Another extremely strong option. Yeah, failover, quick failover is a key one. I like to call the affect the group the Christmas lights scenario. So you remember, I'm old enough to remember you take one Christmas light out and the whole string goes out. So, hey, I might want that, right? Depending on the scenario. Well, I think we covered that earlier. So, AGs have flexibility with some additional sliders that you can use really to match the proposed solution to your requirements and, frankly, your pocketbook, really. So it depends on how your organization's going. Now, we're going to go into this just little pieces here because I think it's important. So one thing about AGs is there's different options and different ways to set it up. And it's not really setting up the AGs that's different in the cloud and on-prem. It's how you're going to connect. So in Azure, we have different ways of connect. Now, I'll tell you, the preferred solution is going to be to use a multi-subnet configuration, which essentially replicates what you have on-prem. So you have a virtual network, you have multiple subnets in each, and each replica is going to go to a different subnet. And then you have a listener and everything's good. There are limitations. With your and by the way, that's in the doc. It's going to be in the documentation. If you have legacy apps and you can't change the connection string, then there's going to be some limitations, right? And if you need to be able to say that it is a multi-subnet is true, right? This is why we still have single subnet. So if you have to use a single subnet, you can use a virtual name with a load balancer. If you use a load balancer, you're going to be introducing some complexity because you have to set it up and maintain it. If you ever set up a load balancer, it's not easy, it's complicated. And the settings can get wrong and it can go bad. We've had a lot of CSS cases actually on using this. Not only is it difficult to configure, the load balancer actually increases the failover time because the load balancer has to wait for a notification that there's an outage, and then it's like, oh, okay, now it's time to fail over. So there's actually an increased latency with actually using the load balancer, and it increases your failover time. The last one you can use is a distributed network name listener, but it also has limitations. It has to have a unique port. The standard port 1433 is not an option, and that port that you choose for the listener must be available, and it can't be used for anything else. So my preferred method is going to be telling you to use an availability group with multi-subnet configuration. It's just easier, and it's very similar to what you're already doing on-prem. Okay. Another thing to think about when it comes to Azure, if you were in Bob's workshop, this was definitely covered, is our redundancy options. You don't really have to think about this, contend with this topic on-prem, but you definitely need to in Azure because when you're on-prem, you have control over your servers and when they're going to be patched, right? You have full control over everything. You don't necessarily have all that control in Azure. In Azure, if things are going to happen and they may or may not be noticeable, we may do a live migration of a virtual machine, for example, right, to another host. It's a small, impactful event. It may not register, but there's going to be times where the VM is unresponsive for some amount of time, and the worst thing to happen would be if both VMs were to go to offline in a header configuration, right? Like 2 replicas for an AG, for example. So then you no longer have availability. So what do? Well, there's essentially 2 options for you, and here's the key thing. You better do these up front. You can't opt into it after the fact. Availability sets and availability zones is when you provision the VM. You cannot do this after the fact. Okay, so availability sets within a single Azure data center, when the availability set allows you to do is ensure that 2 virtual machines that are in the same availability set are not going to go down at the same time. And what we do, thank you. What we do is we have update domains and fault domains. I'm going to go quick here. Update domains are for scheduled maintenance. Fault domains, it basically, what rack is it in, what power is it connected to, all that sort of thing. So it guarantees some level of connectivity. And we also have this concept of proximity placement groups, make sure that stuff goes together and there's some basic network connectivity as it moves over. Availability zones is going to give you more. With an availability zone, you get 4 nines of availability. using 2 more VMs in a separate availability zone. So the way zones work, there's going to be two separate data centers within a region with redundant power, separate infrastructure, separate networking, physically separate. So this is a physical separate protection that you're getting. So like within a data center. Now, some regions do not have availability zones like West US. Premium SSD v2 requires zonal support. So you will not be using West US with premium SSD v2. I'm just an example of what I've been saying, the way you need to look at the stuff in the cloud as you're making this migration, okay? All right. Again, I have so many references of this. So the question here is, you have some options with all this. You want to optimize for performance, or do you want to optimize for resiliency? So one thing about availability sets is that your VM, your virtual machines will be closer together. This means that if you're using a synchronous availability group, you may have slightly lower latency between 2 VMs, especially when you place your VMs in that proximity placement group, which is why that's so important. Now, if it oh, I thought you were flagging. Now, if it's not as available, there may be some compatibility issues, but if you're doing always-on availability groups with synchronous replication, and you absolutely cannot tolerate latency on the synchronous availability groups, then availability sets is the way to go. Availability sets with proximity placement groups, okay? So always on availability groups with synchronous replication. You can always do AG with synchronous replication. This works fine for most people, but monitor. That's why I have an asterisk. Did I put the asterisk on there? No, I removed it. Actually, I had an asterisk on there before. I was waffling about whether or not I was going to keep it. The reason why I did that is monitor your send queue and redo queue. Synchronous works fine for most people. The network connectivity in Azure is extremely strong, but monitor it. And monitor it along with your workloads and your other activities that you're stacking on that could potentially impact your send queue or redo queue. So those are the key points that I wanted to get there. Okay, so making some tough decisions. Okay, so we gave you all the options. We want to know what you think. And so the thing is, like, how do you choose? Like, what's your RPO? What's your RTO? This is all going to differ. It's going to be from your organization. How critical is that application? What does it mean to be down? So if you went and pulled the plug and said, like, okay, 5 minutes, what's the level of freak out? If it really impacts the business, then absolutely, I'm going to spend the money to provide all those levels of protection. I'm not going to do it for everything. Your SLA is going to differ depending on the criticality of your application and the impact of the business if you were to lose data, right? How many databases? Really good point back there. Database is a rule of thumb, okay? Monitor, because like I could have one environment with 10 databases, another environment with the same count, and based on the workload, it would be drastically different, right? Am I doing reporting? Is it a high-end, mission critical? Is it data where? I mean, it would depend, right? And does the databases affect the group? So it's almost like you knew I had this slide. What's your server role? Dev, test, pre-prod, prod, right? What are the scenarios? Is it reporting, mission critical, OTP type of thing? Is there any, here's the other thing too. I should have had this on the slide. Is there, other than your organization, or is there any partners, groups, is there a level of security that needs to get into any of those replicas? You need to think about that separately. And what else is on the replicas? I mean, do you have apps that would have to live on the machine? Or you're like, yeah, actually, we have no choice. We have to use failover clustering. Just maybe it's a legacy app. Again, things at the top of this, always on availability groups, lower RPO, lower RTO, ideal for high availability disaster recovery. We tend to layer these options. Just be aware of the scale here. So basically just a general overview, top to bottom, really. Bottom of the list are going to be more for DR solutions. Top of the list is a good for both, but you have some flexibility. Okay, timing is going quite well here. So now we're, sorry, I cracked myself up. Okay, HADR scenarios, all right? This is gonna be a lightning round. We're gonna go quick, all right? So Contoso Corporation is a multinational business with headquarters in Boston and operations around the globe. They are creating a division to build new products, and they need SQL servers to support the back end. They are planning stages, and they have outlined requirements for the initial launch. Your job your mission, should you accept it, is to propose a HADR solution for each of them. All right. First scenario, you're on the clock. Contoso Corp wants a development test that will be periodically refreshed with new data for accurate testing, not customer facing, can be down for 1 to 2 days, refresh weekly, only used for Monday, Friday business hours. What do you think? I got 1 backup restore, 2, 3, 4, okay, 5. Backup restore. Would you ever choose anything else?
You could test performance on synchronous availability groups and stuff.
All right, you put and AGs are really easy to set up, so it wouldn't be. If I needed to do this periodically, like, hey, thanks for that. Can you do that on a regular basis for me? What could do that? Yeah, no, I'm with you. I like it. And the ease of setup too just makes it like, the thing is scripting. Say that one more time. Like, I want to make sure I capture the question.
What I meant was that a test or dev environment would be able to test the performance in a production-like environment.
Test the performance in a production-like environment, yeah. And I'll combine that with the ease of, like, I've scripted it out and now, yeah, rinse, repeat, yeah. Okay, so just some things to consider here. Obviously, we mentioned you would need a storage account. If you decided to go down that route, you would have to do everything through that recovery services vault if you use Azure Backup. The size of the VM selected, if it doesn't have the proper network throughput and all that, you could blow out the I/O too, so look at your VM size. I mentioned that point about backup compression and compute overhead too. Be aware of that. But I'm going to tell you, if you can handle it, please. I argue for compression. Okay, generally, I don't want you to think I'm arguing against compression. I argue for it. Just monitor, watch. All right, scenario 2. View databases on internal teams who shouldn't have access to production SQL servers. Internal team use, access to less than 10 databases, can be down for up to 2 hours. Does not need real-time data. What do you think? What do y'all think? Log shipping. Yep. Yeah, once you kind of get that on a schedule kind of thing, that's where log shipping is pretty strong, and it has that lower database count. It's the same best practices for backup restore. You also may need to pay attention to the performance impact of your log shipping schedule. Sometimes that can happen. Just watch your log shipping schedule, your RPO goals, and along with other things that happen to be hitting in that window. All right, I'm watching the clock here. Okay. All right, scenario 3. Contoso is creating a multi-tenant app. Each customer will have its own database for security reasons. Key requirements: app with high throughput, heavy transactions. The transaction log generation rate is very high. It's getting to that point back there. More than 100 databases that have to fail over together, and there is no region redundancy that is required. What do you choose? Most likely. I would say that just the caveats, that storage account and how you connect is the most critical. And that's why I know I'm pushing always on availability groups. It's just easier for most folks. Like, is that fair? It's fair. Okay. Now we did, I found it. We did improve thread management in SQL Server 2022. The parallel redo thread pool means that the instance level thread pool shared with all databases having redo work. With this, each database can take the benefit of parallel redo. The parallel redo thread pool allows for multiple threads to process the log records of one database at a time in parallel. In previous versions, the number of available threads for redo was limited to 100. That was it. Thank you. 5 minutes to funk. We're going to get to that demo. You can guess what the last one is. Now, I told you here, and I've got the links, heartbeat threshold settings. They need to be relaxed. Otherwise, you get Flappy Birds, and that's no bueno. Basically, that's me saying I don't want your stuff to fail over randomly. Or bounce back and forth. That's not good. So Flappy Birds, right? So test the heartbeat threshold settings. That's probably the key thing. And I have all the references in the docs here. If you have to use failover clustering, I just hopefully saved y'all an unnecessary downtime. Scenario 4. Y'all want to throw it out? Always on availability groups. Yeah, so this is like, you've got a lower number of databases. You've got that requirement, less than 5 minutes of downtime allowed in the main SQL Server. Regional replica for DR may need to be required. Always on availability groups provide a tremendous amount of flexibility. And thankfully, Taryn and team has made our lives a lot easier, and I'm going to show this in a demo here in just a second. Again, like the failover cluster instance, when it comes to best practices, read the documentation out there. It goes through all the ins and outs of what you should do with AGs in Azure. Use multi-subnet if possible to remove that load balancer because it just reduces that additional failover time, which you do not want. Take advantage of those paired regions, by the way, as well. And definitely look at the references I have here. So let's make it, hey, happy days. Because of Taryn Pratt and team, it is happy days, and we're going to show you this. AG deployment, how much time do I have? Oof, very close. Like 4 minutes, right? Perfect. AG deployment made easy. So we're going to reduce the complexity. It's an end-to-end experience. It's doing all this for you. So has anyone provisioned a VM through the Azure portal? Okay. So it's going to look very similar, essentially like a subset of the options, but then some additional capabilities to make this way easier. And all you have to do is click this little checkbox. All right, so let's do this. So when you click that checkbox and you pick your image, we're giving you a layer of how you look at the VM, and it's going to be a little bit different here. So I can actually pick the number of virtual machines, put in the virtual machine names, and this essentially is building this script here. Your availability options, they'll be set or zone based on what you need. Make sure you put in your licensing stuff. The savings are tremendous. I kid you not. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for just a second because this is, okay, so if you already have one, if you clicked advanced, you can put in your network security group. If you see down here, so you're going to have, each VM will be in its own subnet. The listener IP that it picks, it's going to pick a free IP. So most likely you're going to work with your server network engineer, and they're likely to have some rules on what the listener should be. Just you put it in. Otherwise, it's picking a free IP out and giving it to your virtual machine in its configuration. There's the rules on zones. You could have 2 in the same zone, but you can't have everything in one zone. So that level of protection is there. This is Windows Server failover clustering credentials. You are putting this is not intra. This is your organization's domain. This is the Windows Active Directory. Okay, that's what you're putting in here. This is not an Azure thing. Oof. How did I do that? I just messed that up. All right, here, hold on. Let me get there. That's not bad, right? From here, okay. Yeah, there we go. 1 minute. Yeah, this will be good. We may be like 1 minute over because I'm literally the demos at the end. Support for GMSA. Yep. So we have that support as well. On the storage, okay. So Premium SSD v2 is in public preview, okay? This is not that public preview. I've gotten this question in the hallway. That's not available here yet just because of the preview. Because GA, yes, of course, you're going to be able to do, the goal is to be able to have all the storage options here. But this is your storage choice, just like you currently have in Azure for provisioning. Okay. Multiple disk and in a storage pool, we do that all for you. You do not have to worry about configuring your storage pool. And all the settings, everything you do in your deployment, if you choose to deploy 5 VMs, they're going to have the same options, the same configuration, essentially going to be exactly the same. Your full choice on whether or not you want to have automatic failover, synchronous or not, if you want to have readable secondaries or not, it's all here for you. You have that full level of flexibility. So if you've done always on availability group management deployment on-prem, we're essentially matching quite a bit of that experience for you. And we're just making the deployment so much easier. Like I said, for these options here, optimized for ad hoc workload, your max stop, all that stuff, it's going to be the same for each replica in the deployment. Tags, if you use tags, the very end, this prereq, this is important. What do you have to have? You've got to have the ability to create objects in Active Directory. That script, that prereq validation script, takes all of the prompts that you've been doing up to that point, along with the validation. Do you have the ability to create objects in Active Directory? We ask you to run that script and acknowledge it. And then that's the only thing outside of the portal that you need to do. And boom, we deploy a massive, potentially, configuration for you. Or just a subset of exactly what you need in the cloud. Then you can go into your environment and actually see the stuff deployed. So you actually see the listener, you see the replicas, all based on what you've done, along with your networking scenario that you set up in that deployment, in that provisioning step. And is that everything? And that's it. Cool. So, thank you very much. I apologize for being a minute and change over. Here is some additional links and references for you, and I'm going to have this deck up. I really hope y'all enjoyed this. We talked about some of the everything. The rest of it's in the deck and notes, and feel free to hit me up, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.